Hinterland Education Development, Technical and Vocational Training, Literacy Enhancement. Education is on the move. On Education Spotlight, we look at developments within the education sector and how Guyanese can take advantage of the opportunities available. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Education Spotlight. Today, we're going to be talking about curriculum reform. This process began back in 2018 when it was recognized that the curriculum had not had any holistic review in about 3 decades. Director of the National Center for Educational Resource Development, Mrs. QUENITA WALROND-LEWIS, tells us more about it.
With that in mind, we wanted to make sure that we were leaning in on the best pedagogy, what was at the forefront of education best practice, and be able to couch all that in a foundation that speaks to something that is uniquely Guyanese. So even as we contemplated what our new curriculum would look like, we ended up building out a curriculum framework that is grounded in what we envisage the ideal Guyanese citizen, the ideal Guyanese child would look like once they completed their education process. So our renewed curriculum is firmly rooted in that framework. So even as you go through the discrete subject areas, you're going to see things that are unique to our Guyanese context that is put over in a sense that is more student-centered for our learners, easier for our teachers to apply. And we've basically taken the guesswork out of teaching and learning, because even as we look at the approaches that we would inculcate within the classrooms, we are definitely moving away from the teacher being the seat of all knowledge, the center of all knowledge, and moving towards more child-centered approaches to teaching and learning. And what's exciting for me is that it brings the fun back to learning. It's where children now get to be co-creators in their education experience, not just passive recipients. We're no longer teaching for regurgitation of facts. We are looking for our learners to become critical and cognitive thinkers, for them to become doers of their education, creators of their education. And it's a really exciting process, because even as we explore the core areas, because the renewal was done for our English, language arts, our math, science, and social studies programs. And one of the unique features of our renewed curriculum is that we did not treat with them as discrete subject silos. We are preaching and teaching cross-curricular integration. This now tells us that, of course, you are going to find elements of science in math. So why not do science and math? Why not do language arts and social studies? Why not write a composition about a scientific topic that the children are exploring? So just the entire process of itself is very contextually relevant for us. It is something that brings education back to the heart of learning. You're teaching for understanding, not teaching for regurgitation, not teaching to pass just a test. You're teaching to build a citizen who can operate and maneuver with kindness, with empathy, with a sense of their unique Guyanese-ness, even as they learn language, math, science, social studies.
She explained that to ensure this is successful, emphasis has to be placed on how it is delivered.
Of course, a big piece of this puzzle is how we deliver the curriculum. The curriculum on its own is just words and pictures on a paper, hyperlinks, but it's the delivery that you'll really see the difference for our learners.
So far, the renewed curriculum has been piloted in 105 schools across the country, in every single education district.
As much as there was apprehension at the beginning, the enthusiasm for this new way of teaching and just the entire teaching and learning interplay has had other schools going, when is it going to be our turn? So now we're preparing for a national scale up of our curriculum. Well, when I say national, we're doing a phased approach to the scale up. So you're going to have our coastland regions 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, and District Georgetown. We're going to be scaling up the grades 1 through 4 renewed curriculum across all primary schools in those districts. And our approach to training our teachers or getting our teachers ready has also shifted. Because again, we need to follow what is best practice or what is current in the research literature. And that caused us some self-reflection and thinking about how could we modify our approach to help our teachers feel more comfortable in the new dispensation and empower them to have that autonomy to really explode and come to life in ways that are most meaningful for their children.
What does this look like?
For us, instead of doing one mass training over a prolonged period. So for example, historically, we would do 5 days of training, very intense, all of the new things that we want our teachers to roll out in the schools. However, if you think that through, if you think about how we are as humans, after the first 2 days, you reach saturation point, perhaps. Or even if you make it through all 5 days and you get back into your new setting, at the first point of struggle, it's so easy to go back into old habits and fall back into old routines once things become a little bit challenging. What we have done is been responsive to the literature that says for continuous professional development to be meaningful, to be impactful, and to have that kind of change that's necessary, you first of all do a couple of things. You reach your educators more frequently. You give them smaller chunks of information that they can tease apart, practice, struggle with, and then you build a community around that practice. So how have we been responsive to that? We now have once monthly meetings with our educators in their Indigenous learning environments. And what does that mean? It means that we go to our master trainers, and we have a cadre of trainers, go to each cluster. And a cluster is a grouping of schools within a particular community. So now it's not region-based training, it's cluster-based training, closer to where our teachers are working, right where their school environments are. So if you have constant blackouts in the training environment, we have to figure out how can we best deliver in a situation where there's constant blackout. Just to give a contextual example. So now we are meeting with those teachers once monthly, as opposed to once a year, once a term, or once a half year. We are giving them a structured program for the curriculum implementation that takes them through not just how to teach the curriculum, but also what are some of the foundation principles they need to understand for themselves. So we call it our pedagogy track and our methodology track. Preparing to teach and how to teach. And we have that program structured in such a way that they have bite-sized chunks of information that, again, they can test out, try out, argue back and forth with. And the process is spanning the length of time that allows us to prepare them for when they have to roll out in September, as well as hold their hands through the process beyond September. So it's not just here you go make it happen. It's we're with you every step of the way to prepare you to launch. And once you've launched out, we're with you every step of the way until you are comfortable enough to go it alone. Our colleagues at CPCE have been partners with us every step of the way. Even some of the more senior faculty at the college and even in their administration have been experts that we have been leaning on as master trainers, as instructional leaders, as reviewers of the curriculum, as writers of the curriculum. So the CERO College of Education has been working with us hand in glove throughout this process. And I know that they too have active systems in place to co-opt this new teaching and learning and utilizing this new curriculum in their program of study for pre-service teachers.
The renewed curriculum looks at the best ways to engage pupils through different methodologies.
A blended learning approach could be utilizing a flipped classroom. And what that can look like is you have your notes or research materials that the learners get to advance preview, whether at home. So it's also a reimagination of what homework can look like, where the materials are storehoused in your online space, whether it's your Google Classroom or your team or whatever the case, or even in a textbook, because textbooks also have their place as sources of information, not the only, but as a part of the sources of information. And our learners do their pre-reading before they come to class. And when they come to class, now it's that experiential component of their learning, where they get to go through experiments that test out what they might have read as theory, where they get to solve problems that can potentially challenge some of those things they would have read, challenge or support. You always have to think about learning as inquiry. So using that kind of a methodology or that kind of mindset, your learners get to go inside and out and around and through the information that you are trying to convey to them as the classroom teacher.
So far, the renewed curriculum has been piloted in grades 1 to 4.
We are rolling up grades 1 through 4. The grade 5 and 6 levels have not yet been piloted, but they have been authored, they've been written. So we have our curriculum actually written from nursery to grade 9, but we've only pilot tested so far up to grade 4, and the results from our pilot were very positive. So that's why we were encouraged to scale up in this way. So we'll be scaling up to our hinterland regions in academic year 2023. It's been a labor of love for us from 2018 to present. We began piloting the grade 1 and 2 curriculum, I believe, in academic year 2020. So, yeah.
The renewed curriculum also addresses some of the challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Even the terminology learning loss speaks to a mindset, right? And just give me some space, you'll see where I'm going with this. During the period where children were out of school, they weren't in a bubble. They were not devoid of learning. They were away from structured learning spaces. And the Ministry of Education did a beautiful job coordinating efforts to get children, to get our learners engaged, whether it's in organized methods during online school, whether it's through the use and dissemination of our worksheets and so on. But to your point, because the renewed curriculum, and actually I do want to say the consolidated curriculum is a very good foundation piece for implementation of the renewed curriculum, because by paring away and paring back all of the either highly repeated or superfluous or way too technically or developmentally inappropriate content that began to that had crowded our existing curriculum, we were able now to drill down into the real curriculum expectations that children needed to master to be successful going forward. And now that you have a focus on what is developmentally appropriate, what is enough, and even what is just in time for learning, it's going to put our children in a better position to continue to be successful. So as much as there was lost time and lost, I guess, capacity in some of the more technical aspects of learning, our children, I'm sure, did learn how to cope. They did learn how to survive loss. They did learn how to adapt. So for me, learning loss, sometimes people get really caught up on the things that were depleted or things that were diminished. But I also want to just, I don't know, put in my own little nugget there to say that sometimes, even in the face of loss, we get the greatest opportunity. Because, I mean, look at the things that are opened up to us now. These kinds of leapfrogging and technology infusion in schools, the leapfrogging of our teachers building their own capacities and how to use these technologies, and just the wherewithal and the will to buy textbooks for all of our learners. These are some really ground-breaking, ground-shifting things that have happened in our sector that came as a result of all the loss. So hopefully taken together as an aggregate, we could definitely continue to help our learners to achieve more than was taken away.
Before we go, here are some highlights from the education sector over the last week. Some 67 educators in the Region 4 Education District and 2 from Region 8's Education District graduated from the Ministry of Education's Education Management Certificate course. This is part of the ministry's efforts to improve the management skills of educators across Guyana. Also, some 88 students of Christchurch Secondary were able to walk the stage after 2 years of being unable to host a graduation ceremony. The ceremony, which was hosted at the National Cultural Center, saw 32 students from the graduating class of 2020 and 53 from the class of 2021 receiving their certificates and special prizes for completing their secondary education. This has been Education Spotlight. Thanks for watching, and remember to join us again next week for another edition. Goodbye!